we can praise the Lord at 6:45 on a Thursday evening. Amen. Hallelujah, hallelujah. Oh, we can do better than that. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Well, I am Reverend Kayla Holiday, and I am honored to be able to welcome you all this evening to Greater Mount Zion AME Church, where our very fine pastor is the Reverend Dr. Charles Boyer. Our First Lady is Sister Rosalie Boyer, and we are very excited to have you all here on this evening for this very important conversation regarding reparations. Amen. We are going to go ahead and get started. I am going to first open us with a word of prayer, and then we'll go into a welcome and occasion. Amen? Amen. Let us look to the Lord. God of justice, God of restoration, God who sees and does not forget. We gather tonight aware that this conversation is sacred and it is serious. We thank you for the work already being done through the New Jersey Reparations Council, through NJISJ, through Salvation and Social Justice, and through communities who have refused to let injustice be normalized. You are a God who liberates, a God who repairs. You are a God who calls your people not only to believe, but to act. As we talk about reparations, we ask that you would steady us. As we name harm, we ask that you would comfort us. As we wrestle with policy and practice, we ask that you would guide us. Guard this space tonight, Lord. Let honesty live here. Let dignity live here. Let courage live here. Help us to hold strong opinions without losing compassion. Help us to confront systems without condemning one another. Help us to remember that justice is not about vengeance. It is about restoration. Move us beyond talk tonight, Lord. Move us towards repair. Move us toward policy that reflects your heart for justice and for dignity. We ask that you would bless the panel on this evening, Lord. Bless the moderators. Bless every person gathered here tonight. May this not be the end of the conversation, but the beginning of sustained work. All of these things we ask in your precious and holy name. Amen, amen, and amen. Well, again, good evening, everyone. And we do welcome you to this sacred space, and we thank you for being here tonight. We are grateful to partner with NJISJ and to host this important conversation on reparations. As many of you know, the work of the New Jersey Reparations Council has helped to shift this conversation in this great state of New Jersey from theory to policy, from abstraction to structure. Through research, testimony, and community engagement, they have laid out a comprehensive framework for what repair could actually look like here in New Jersey. Not just symbolic gestures, but substantive change. And I would also like to acknowledge another organization deeply committed to this work, and that is Salvation and Social Justice, led by Reverend Dr. and First Lady Boyer. Though they are not here with us tonight, we thank them for their faithful leadership, their moral clarity, and their consistent witness through faith and justice that those two things can work together. Their work reminds us that the gospel is not confined just here in the sanctuary, but it lives in policy rooms, in community meetings, and in movements for equity. As a church, we at Greater Mount Zion are not entering this conversation as political spectators. We are entering it as people of faith. Because for us, this is not simply about policy. It is about repair. It is about total restoration. It is about what it means to live out a faith that saves souls and transforms systems. Salvation is not only about individual redemption. It is about restored relationships. It is about communities being made whole. Throughout Scripture, whenever God saves, God also restores. Whenever God redeems, God also repairs. So when we talk about reparations in this moment, we are not speaking of historical harm done just to slaves, though we must name that as well. We are also talking about the ongoing realities. We are talking about the over-policing and over-incarceration of Black and brown communities. We are talking about families who have been fractured by systems that disproportionately target certain neighborhoods. We are talking about economic consequences that ripple through generations. And as we witness what is happening around us through immigration enforcement and ICE, communities that are living in fear, families that are being separated, and uncertainty that is looming, we are reminded again that harm is not a relic of the past. It is very present, it is structural, and it is urgent. So reparations then must be about repair. Reparations ask what has been broken and who has borne the cost of the brokenness. And then it asks, what would it mean to repair that damage in tangible and structural ways? Tonight is about open and honest conversation. There may be some discomfort, and we must acknowledge that. There may be strong emotions, but discomfort is not our enemy, indifference is. Our hope is that this panel does more than just inform, but that it mobilizes us, that we may leave here not just being thoughtful, but that we will leave here being committed, that we would leave here not just being aware, but that we would leave here organized. Because repair takes work. It requires advocacy, it requires partnership, and it requires courage. And so, my brothers and sisters, my prayer is that tonight moves us one step closer to not just knowing, but to actually doing the work. And so at this moment, I would like to turn over this program to John Pierre from the NJISJ, who will be our MC.
Can you all hear me? Wonderful, wonderful. First, I just want to say thank you to Reverend Holiday for such a beautiful opening. That was a really nice way to set the tone for the evening. I appreciate you, Reverend Holiday. Thank you so much. And I want to say thank you to all of you for being here this evening. Good evening, everyone. Can we get a little bit more energy? Reverend Holiday sort of got us started, so good evening, everyone. As she said, my name is Jean-Pierre Brutus. I am a senior counsel at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. I was also the convener of the New Jersey Reparations Council. Welcome all of you to the first Reparations Town Hall hosted by the Institute and the New Jersey Reparations Council. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I just want to say thank you to Greater Mount Zion AME Church for having us this evening. Thank you to Reverend Holiday, as well as our partners at Salvation and Social Justice. Raquel Romans Henry is here with us, Reverend Boyer and his wife as well, AAPI New Jersey, Leo Women Voters of New Jersey, Returning Citizens Support Group, as well as Returning Citizens Union Essex County Chapter, and my wonderful colleagues at the Institute. Nason Carr, who was a key and organizer of tonight's event, Asada Mann, Kimberly Cross, Nadia Rush, Isabel, Wendy Liz, and so many others who made this evening possible. So I appreciate you all, and as well as my colleague, Soraya Johnson, who we will be hearing from later this evening as the moderator of our panel. I just want to let you all know that this meeting is being recorded and live streamed on the Greater Mount Zion AME's Facebook page. So for those of you who are watching virtually this evening, welcome, and hopefully you will learn a lot this evening. So for tonight's event in Town Hall, we will have a discussion about why reparations in New Jersey. I will give a brief overview of the New Jersey Reparations Council's work and the report for such a time as this, the nowness for reparations for Black people in New Jersey. Then we'll be followed by a panel discussion, which my colleague Soraya will be leading. It's called Justice Beyond Punishment, and where advocates, organizers, and impacted folks will talk about the relationship between criminal justice and reparations. You'll hear from panelists Raquel Romans-Henry, Taylor Pickett-Stokes, and as well as Edwin Chino Ortiz. And then we'll close out with a call to action as well. So, why reparations? Particularly why reparations in New Jersey of all places? Before I get started on that, I just want to say yesterday was a great day. And why was yesterday a great day? Not just because it was my cousin's birthday, my cousin Melissa, who's like my sister to me, but also yesterday is February 18th, which is the birthday of Toni Morrison, and not to mention Audre Lorde. And the reason why I bring up Toni Morrison is because in 1987, she published her literary memorial to slavery, Beloved. And at the time in which she published it, there was no memorial to slavery in the United States. And so she had to fill in the gap with her monumental work, Beloved. And as part of that work, as she noted at the beginning of that text, there was not even a bench by the side of the road to take into account slavery in the United States. And you cannot tell the story of the United States without talking about slavery, particularly given that we see in this moment what is happening around the United States. And so the question that we often have received is, why talking about slavery and reparations here in New Jersey? And the answer to that is slavery shaped every single aspect of New Jersey. And too many people in our state believe that it never happened. Actually, I want to ask all of you in this room is, how many of you learned about slavery in New Jersey while you were in school? Raise your hand if you have. Right. Only a handful of you, right? 56% of people in New Jersey do not know that slavery happened in New Jersey. I'll say that again. 56% of people in New Jersey are not aware that slavery happened here in New Jersey. And that is purposeful. That is not by accident. Slavery was New Jersey's original sin and its lasting stain. And New Jersey benefits from this kind of halo of progressivism, where it tells a particular kind of story about itself as being exceptional, progressive, outstanding, without this impact of slavery. And so this is where the work of the New Jersey Reparations Council, our Say the Word campaign, and the need for reparations comes in. Some of you are already aware of this history, but I just want to give you a little bit of context for the council. In November of 2019, the state was introduced to a piece of legislation by advocates and organizers from around the state of New Jersey, advocating for the establishment of a New Jersey Reparations Task Force. And this bill would study the issue of slavery in New Jersey. And I'll say that again, it's a very simple bill. It would study the issue of slavery. It was just a study bill. That bill, unfortunately, couldn't even be heard for a hearing when our president and CEO of the Institute, along with his colleagues, organizers and advocates and leaders across the state, met with key legislators asking for the bill to be heard. What they heard back was, why use the name reparations? Why not use something else? Why not call it a racial wealth gap task force, or a racial disparity task force? Or even better yet, why not call it a Black Lives Matter task force? Anything but reparations, right? In part because they felt reparations made people feel uncomfortable, made them people feel sick, right? It had this kind of visceral feeling where they didn't really want to talk about reparations. And so the Institute launched our Say the Word campaign to focus on reparations. But even doing all that work, we had the racial justice uprisings of George Floyd, or after his murder by the Minneapolis police. The bill didn't get heard for a hearing. So the Institute, we launched the New Jersey Reparations Council in June of 2023 in Perth Amboy. And why Perth Amboy? Perth Amboy was a major site for the trafficking of enslaved people here in New Jersey. That council was made up of 55 scholars and experts, advocates, attorneys, historians, economists, community leaders, community members, and it was co-chaired by two historians, Khalil Gibran Muhammad and Tajania Henderson. And it would be a 2-year project that would study the history of slavery in New Jersey and its impact on contemporary racial inequality, and it would come up with recommendations to address those harms. It was grounded in extensive research and documentation, and it draws an important line, a direct one, between slavery in New Jersey and contemporary harms. In that report, for such a time as this, the Nowness of Reparations for Black People in New Jersey, one of the key things that comes out of that is that New Jersey is found to be the slave state of the North. I'll say that again. New Jersey is slave state of the North. By 1830, here in the United States, of the enslaved population in the North, 2/3 of them lived here in New Jersey. New Jersey was the only state in the North to support the Federal Fugitive Slave Act. It was the only state to vote against, in the North, to vote against Abraham Lincoln in both 1861 and in the 1864 election. And it was a state that relied so much on slave labor that it was a slave society, not just a society with slaves. So enslaved labor built the infrastructure for its economy. And you get a sense of how deep and abiding and structural slavery was in New Jersey, because the slave codes in New Jersey were reminiscent and reflective of southern states. So you see how harsh they were. They prevented Black people from congregating after a certain time at night because of fear of rebellion. Also, they imposed all kinds of criminal punishments on Black people for minor things to impose this kind of punishment regime. Also, when New Jersey was first established as a colony, it created this kind of racialized distribution of property where enslavers and white settlers were given many acres of land, sometimes up to 150 acres of land just for coming to New Jersey, and then additional acres of land for enslaved people that they brought. As part of this report and part of the work of the council, we divided the work into 9 subject matter areas. So we had things like history of slavery, segregation, health equity, democracy and justice. And each of these areas were designed to look at the way in which slavery impacted and shaped these areas, but also Jim Crow and segregation in New Jersey, and how that impacted contemporary racial inequality. As part of this work, you see the interconnection between segregation and health outcomes and environmental justice and public safety, right? These things are interconnected, they're structural, they're interrelated, and so one piece leads to another piece, which leads to another piece. An example is after slavery ends in New Jersey, where the state found in 1821, you'll hear about this later, that this is 36 years before the Dred Scott decision, in which the state found that Black people had no rights to which a white person was bound to respect, right? This is the famous Dred Scott decision, 857. In 1821, here in the state of New Jersey, the state said that if you saw a Black person in New Jersey, you automatically assumed that they were enslaved. That was the assumed status of a Black person in New Jersey. And yes, as a part of supporting the Federal Fugitive Slave Act, slave catchers from the South would come into New Jersey to kidnap Black people, including free Black people. Some of you have seen the movie 12 Years a Slave, hopefully. And the Cannon Johnson Company in 1821 would round up Black people in New Jersey to sell them down to the South. Right? There was this connection between slavery in the South and slavery in New Jersey. Right? And this idea of forcing people to show their papers, right? To demonstrate their freedom, demonstrate their status, assume that they were unfree, assume that they were enslaved. Right? What does that remind you of? Right? We are in a moment now when folks look to the 1930s to think about, in 1930s in Western Europe, to think about this current moment, to talk about fascism and authoritarianism. And their usual historical referent is the 1930s. But as so many Black folks at that time pointed out in the 1930s and 1940s, is that fascism is really colonization turns inward. And so when we're thinking about the historical antecedents that lay the groundwork for what we're seeing now with ICE taking up undocumented people, immigrants, people of color, we can look just directly to the history of the United States, and we can look at the history here in New Jersey as well, in which Black people were asked for their papers to demonstrate their freedom, right? The nature of Jim Crow, the nature of enslavement is this kind of arbitrary, unaccounted power, forcing people to act in a certain kind of way, to be fearful to leave their homes, fearful to live up to the rights that they have under our Constitution. And so when we're thinking about historical presidents, there is much that we can look to here in the history of New Jersey and here in the United States. We're thinking about how to move forward. Also, and just to give you some more context, particularly given that tonight's discussion is going to be about reparations and criminal justice, I do want to link that so many of our policing and police forces here in the state established themselves in the 19th century to centralize their efforts to control and survey Black people. Jersey City's police force goes back to 1829. Watchmen, marshals, and police often made no distinction between free and enslaved Black people, claiming that all Black people pretended to be free. New Jersey started its first state penitentiary here in Trenton in 1798, decades before slavery ended. In 1837, New Jersey's Black population, Black people made up 6% of New Jersey's population, but they were 1/3, 33% of the total incarcerated people in the state, and that's 1837, right? By the 1850s, Black people were 5% of the state population, but 24% of the New Jersey state's prisons. Between 1856 and 1886, New Jersey's prison population tripled in size. They were hovering around 3.8% of the population, but 26% of the prison population. And New Jersey's prison system reflected the practices of enslavement, exploiting the labor of imprisoned people, particularly around convict leasing, which was common in the South and existed in New Jersey, where landowners or companies purchased the labor of incarcerated people through contract with the state. The state then forced these people to work for contracting companies or landowners for no direct wages. Incarcerated people were forced to perform farm labor at New Jersey's prisons in Rahway, Leesburg, Bordentown, and Clinton. New Jersey's approach to punishing people also strongly resembled the treatment of enslaved people that they suffered under slavery. Corporal punishment, physical torture, and regular forms of prison discipline. New Jersey's use of corporal punishment was unusual for a state in the Northeast, particularly in relation to states like New York or New Hampshire. And underlying the kind of segregation in Jim Crow in New Jersey, and yes, I use Jim Crow purposefully because we had separate and unequal facilities here in New Jersey's leisure areas, their beaches, and places like Atlantic City, is this kind of racial terror, this underlying threat and sometimes actual violence, constantly hovering, constantly on the edge. You see that in the lynching, the documented lynching in the 1870s here in New Jersey. And then also I just want to highlight some of the long history of over-policing of Black people here in Trenton. After William Horner was murdered, he was a furniture store owner here in Trenton in 1948. There was a sort of public outcry where police officers would patrol the area just looking for any Black person. They would call themselves crime crushers or the Trenton Gestapo. And they had orders to shoot to kill on sight. And they created a reign of terror here in Trenton for Trenton's Black community. Police, according to a historian, police with Tommy guns rounded up random Black men whom they questioned, bludgeoned, and then released without charge. This was not a singular event in Trenton's history or New Jersey's history, this racialized police terror. The NAACP documented more than 30 instances of police violence against Black people in Trenton, including 6 shootings for quote-unquote resisting arrest. This is familiar, right? We have heard about ICE agents lying about actions that they've taken against people here where they've come up with false charges, false stories about what's happened. And so we're thinking about this current moment in which we see this authoritarian backsliding, this undermining of our multiracial democracy. We think about what is the role for repair, what is the role for reparations. And so our report is not just a harm report documenting slavery and its harms here in New Jersey, it also comes with recommendations to address those harms. And we have close to 100 recommendations across a broad range of areas, including public safety and justice, including economic justice, including to close the racial wealth gap. Our colleague and Dr. Laura Sullivan leads our racial wealth gap work, and what she's found is the racial wealth gap has only increased here in New Jersey to be one of the largest, if not the largest in the country, at close to over 600,000 between white households here in New Jersey and black households. Over 600,000. And as I said, that has direct roots in slavery in New Jersey. And as part of our recommendations, we take an understanding of reparations as being comprehensive, as being a process where black people can thrive, where black people can flourish, where black people can win here in New Jersey. And as part of our recommendations, we recognize that we are living in a world that slavery made, and we want to live in a world that reparations made. And we offer a blueprint for that. And so we call for closing the racial wealth gap with policies that you're familiar with in thinking about reparations in one way: compensation, direct payments to close the racial wealth gap, direct payments to address the harms of slavery, direct payments for post-slavery harms, but we also call for comprehensive structural reform. Right? We think about reparations comprehensively. So that means that we have recommendations, for example, a state-level 14th Amendment, closing the 13th Amendment loophole around slavery for those who are incarcerated. We also call for universal health care, and we have also a call for programs to address the black maternal mortality rate. We also call for programs and policies to address over-policing, alternatives to policing, more civilian oversight of the police. We also call for a black center of health excellence. And we also have ways to improve and deepen our democracy so that black people can participate even further in our democracy. Yes, this work is daunting, it is difficult, but we look to those who have come before us. If you take a look at the front of the report, it has the Sankofa symbol, and the Sankofa symbol means to go back and get it. And we look to those who came before us, who laid the path for us, and we know that we will lay down the path for those who come after us. And so we understand that we are doing this work not just for us in this generation, for the many generations to come as well. So that's just an overview. There is much that we can talk about in terms of the work of the report. I hope you take a look at it. If you go to there will be up on the screen a sort of a link to the report, and we'll get into it further as well. But hopefully you go to our website, you read it, you take a look at it. I know it's long, but we also have some, which I'm excited about, some additional materials that will help folks engage in the report. We'll have a website, a dynamic website my colleague is working on. We'll also have some more animated videos. You got a chance to see some of those videos, a video earlier. We'll have even more of those. Yeah, I'm excited. I hope you all as well, and I'm really excited about our panel tonight, particularly because I want you to get more of a sense of a flavor of the relationship between reparations and public safety and what that looks like in terms of alternatives to over-policing, right, given the context of what I've laid out for you here tonight. So, moving on to our panel, I'm going to introduce the panel and our panelists, and then my colleague Soraya will moderate. And I just want to give you a little bit over a sense of what the panel is going to be like and what it discusses. And then we'll get into it, which I'm excited about. So just bear with me. All right. So our panel tonight is called Justice Beyond Punishment. Across the US and here in New Jersey, communities are confronting a critical question. What does justice look like beyond punishment? For decades, our criminal legal system has relied on policing, prosecution, and incarceration as the primary tools for maintaining safety. Yet these approaches have produced racialized harm, deepened social inequities, destabilized families, and failed to address the root causes of violence and community vulnerability. So, as part of this, we'll have members, as I said before, folks who have been impacted, advocates, organizers discussing this. I'm really excited about this. My colleague, Soraya Johnson, is the director of our criminal justice reform program here at the Institute. She's an attorney who has dedicated her career to public service, assisting the underrepresented. Prior to being at the Institute, she was the principal court attorney in the Supreme Court of New York. Also, she worked for nearly a decade at the Legal Aid Society in their criminal trial division in Manhattan, as well as a staff attorney and a supervisor. She was actively involved in training and mentorship, policy development, and interdisciplinary collaboration. Please welcome Soraya Johnson as our moderator for tonight's panel. All right. Next panelist, Raquel Romans Henry. She is an advocate and policy expert. She currently serves as the policy director of Salvation and Social Justice. As many of you are well aware, Raquel works with individuals, organizations, and communities to amplify the voices of those who have historically been relegated to the margins of society to ensure that their voices and lived experience inform policy changes in the state of New Jersey. She leads her work with integrity, passion, candor, and good humor, while cultivating a framework that allows her to effectively elevate and support the communities that mean so much to her. Please welcome Raquel. All right. Next panelist is Taylor Pickett Stokes. She is a Trenton native, and she is one of 4 siblings. She earned her Master's of Social Work and Master's of Public Policy and Affairs and Politics in May of 2024. Her work focuses on advancing equity, strengthening underprivileged communities, and reforming policies impacting the carceral system. She previously worked at Rescue Mission of Trenton and Anchor House, and is a certified professional Christian life coach whose philosophy centers on, quote, unbecoming everything that isn't truly you, end quote. She's bold, vocal, and solutions-driven. She's committed to legislative advocacy, government accountability, and ensuring institutions responsible for public welfare operate with equity, efficiency, and integrity. Please welcome Taylor. Our last but not least panelist is Edwin Chino Ortiz. He's a resilient advocate for justice reform and a beacon of hope for individuals impacted by mass incarceration. He has emerged as a catalyst for change. He stands as the executive director and co-founder of the Returning Citizens Support Group, a grassroots organization based in Newark, New Jersey. He also founded Second Chance Developers, a visionary initiative with a mission of building wealth and fostering community development through the construction of affordable homes. These organizations, born of Edwin's firsthand experience, focuses on addressing the multifaceted needs of individuals reentering society after incarceration. Please join me in welcoming Edwin to the panel. All right, I'll pass it over to Soraya. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, John Pierre, and thank you for this introduction. And thank you to our illustrious panel for being here today. And I want to thank you all who are in the room and joining us online for this very important discussion about reparations and what it means to repair our criminal legal system. So I think John Pierre really set us up with the historical context that as it relates to policing. And so my first question for the panel is, many historians trace U.S. policing to slave patrols and post-Civil War white vigilante groups that enforced racial hierarchy. How do those origins continue to influence policing culture, tactics, and power structures today here in New Jersey?
Okay. Thank you for the question, and good evening, everyone. The question is, how does it influence current structures? Well, I guess it's kind of like expecting like the fruit to fall away from the tree, from the root, right? Like what we're seeing is directly related to the origins of these policing systems, and you can't separate yourself from that, or we can't separate the systems from that. So when you're seeing, lack of accountability, when you're seeing, unchecked powers, when you're seeing, John Pierre laid it out where, people have to now walk around with, ID proving that they're legal, quote unquote legal. This is all coming from a slave patrol system. And unfortunately, this country has not done its due diligence in really addressing those roots. And so here we are. The state leads in some of the highest racial disparity as it relates to use of force, right? Black people in New Jersey are more than 3 times likely to face use of force than white residents in the state. If you're in South Orange, now you're talking 10% more likely. If you're in Lakewood, now you're talking 22 times more likely to face police use of force. All of that is rooted in the policing practices that came from slave patrol systems. And unfortunately, our politicians, our electeds, they have not done enough of the hard work to really repair those things. And so we're not going to see the solutions in things like police training. We're not going to see the solutions in things like body camera body camera footage, because they just kill you on film, and then there's no accountability. What we're going to have to see is we're going to have to see serious investments in community-led solutions to really minimize the police footprint in our community. So I guess I'll leave it there.
Thank you for that question, Raquel. Everything you said was well said, and I agree. And just to add to what Ms. Roman said, policing has grown into an entity that is above the law, or acts as though they're above the law, but enforce the law. In general, it's already a rigged game, right? They're policing communities, and that will likely have a higher risk of Black and brown individuals being represented in our carceral system. So those are my thoughts on that question.
Policing, I mean, if you go from community to community, right? I grew up in Newark, still live in Newark, and policing is different, to Princeton and to Millburn, right? Of course, I don't feel safe in those towns. I feel safer in my city because there's people that look like me that are driving around. Nevertheless, we have a system of policing that incorporates the criminal justice system, that is designed structurally, right? Structural racism that targets Black and brown people. So that's what policing looks like. Until we dismantle these systems, these problems are going to persist.
Thank you. So I think you each did a really good job of identifying sort of what the problem is in policing, but I do want to turn, as we are talking about reparations, to reforms and repair. Specifically, we've seen reforms like consent decrees, as you've mentioned, body cameras, and implicit bias trainings that have had mixed results. And so where do you see the line between reforming policing and fundamentally transforming it? We can mix it up. Yes, so we've seen reform efforts like consent decrees, body cameras, and implicit bias trainings have mixed results. Where do you see the line between reforming policing and fundamentally transforming it?
Again, I'm sorry, no, you go first.
Okay, I can start with that. I think I want to start by acknowledging body cameras. The implementation of that was to help make policing more honest, right? Because you can't believe them, right? Police lie. And just when I think about some of the trajectory of the events that has taken place with people, right? If it wasn't for like body cameras, Rodney King would have just been another person beaten, right? But it was on camera. So I think when it comes to the question about reform and transform, I think we have to look at the differences between the two, right? Are we trying to make, you know, policing or include things to try to make it better, or are we trying to build out something totally different and anew, right? And I think we have to acknowledge the difference between those two and what that would look like. So yes, those are my thoughts.
Um, Again, I go back to my original response, right? We have institutions that were built on and designed to incarcerate, right? And we're seeing it today, like my sister Raquel mentioned, you know, now we're targeting immigrants. White Americans are targeting immigrants, right? Um, so for there to be true reform, there has to be a shift in the culture that exists in our country, right? Because we just watched ICE kill cold-bloodedly a white woman, shot 3 times in the face, and then we saw a man who was on the ground and had about 8 agents over him and literally shot him in the back and murdered him cold-blooded, right? And then the leader of this country goes on TV and say that it was justified. So these are, you know, just cultural, systemic problems that exist. So it depends, again, who's looking at the camera, right? What the color of your skin is, that determines the justice that you receive. So um, I don't think that we can have true reform until our systems are transformed.
Ditto. And I'll also add, you know, where the gentleman was killed in Minneapolis, that was 4 blocks from where George Floyd was killed, right? So again, we're not reading the transcripts. We're not learning the lessons, right? So when you're talking about toting the line, or what is that line between reform and transformation within policing, it's going to have to be all of the above. There is no panacea to this problem, right? There's going to have to be real accountability, right? Not this performative, real accountability. We're talking CCRBs. We're talking the end of qualified immunity. We're talking investments in communities. The reality is that the majority of the 911 calls that police are responding to are not violent or criminal offenses. They amount to what you call like quality of life issues, social inconveniences. You know, the kids are romping on the street. You know, there's a houseless person. There's maybe someone who's dealing with substance abuse issues. These are quality of life issues that police are responding to, and police oftentimes don't have the tools, the resources to handle these things. So what's the old saying? When all you got is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. And we know that the safest communities are not the most heavily policed. They're the best resourced. So when you're talking about reform, transformation, whatever language we want to use, what it boils down to is putting the money back in the communities so the communities can respond to these issues as they see fit. We're talking community-led solutions, right? I don't need someone with a gun showing up on my doorstep when I'm having my worst day, right? We need to free up police to really respond to crime. And a mental health call is not a crime. And the truth of the matter is Black and brown communities know very well that every time they call the police, they're playing a game of Russian roulette. That story can end any kind of way. So I think there needs to be real acknowledgement of the fact that we have been truly misinformed on what public safety looks like. What we're calling public safety is really, you know, public health issues. And we need to be having conversations around how do we invest in community-led alternatives to policing in our communities.
And if I could just add to Ms. Roman, I think that there should, so from my understanding and what I see, a lot of the policing that's happening in the communities are not by the people who are from that community, right? And so there's that huge disconnect where you have people policing communities they're not from that they don't understand. I definitely think that that needs to be considered as a form of remedy when it comes to how we police communities, because safety is not just for non-blacks, right? Everybody wants to be safe, right? And so I just wanted to make mention of that as well.
Because you made me think of something else. Also, we can't fall victim to the color conversation around policing, right? Because we should be reminded that the police squad that killed Tyree Nichols, they were all black, right? So this extends beyond the color of the person holding the badge. There is a culture within policing that continues to be perpetuated because those in legislative positions, those in elected positions, they have failed to set up accountability measures for those who hold a badge and a gun. And until we start talking about that, until our budgets start to reflect our values, if you say you care about young people, then we need to be invested in keeping our young people safe and in their education, right? If you say you care about the health of our communities, then we need to be invested in mental health supports, affordable health care. All right. If you say you care about, young people having all the opportunities, then we need to be investing in making sure that our kids are coming home to safe and affordable housing. Right. So our budgets, that it's really going to come down to the dollars and cents. Where are we putting our dollars? Because do a comparative analysis between what New Jersey police are getting versus what we're investing in housing and education and healthcare. So when we check those numbers, then we can come back and start talking about reform and transformation. Until we get those balances sorted out, I don't think we're going to see the change that we're looking for.
Thank you. So you brought up the issue of housing, and then John Pierre did talk to us about how New Jersey has one of the worst racial wealth gaps in the country. I do want to turn it to our children and the school to prison pipeline, and specifically, how does race and zip code shape a young person's likelihood of entering into the criminal legal system?
That's I think if my memory serves me correct, black youth are 30 times more likely to be detained and arrested than white youth. One of the biggest disparity in the nation. Um, you look at our schools, right, and they mimic prisons. You got armed cops, right? Kids are going through metal detectors. Their backpacks are being searched. And you couple that with the other factors, right? Kids are going to school hungry. Their fathers or mothers are incarcerated or dealing with addiction. You got teachers that don't care, that are not from our community, that can't relate to our children, or the things that's going on in our communities. Um, how do we expect our kids to learn or to come to school, when they're hungry and their backpacks are being turned inside out and they're being packed with a wand and being harassed while going into school. Um, that's clearly they're preparing our kids to go to prison, right? Quick example, I tried when I first came home from prison. I tried to go into schools and speak to, our youth. And specifically, one of the schools that I tried to get into was Barringer High School, and I could not get in there. And so that's, again, it's a culture that exists, right? And so prisons are built, cells are built based on our kids. And I'll leave it at that and let my beautiful sisters comment on that.
Thank you, Gina. Well said. I agree with everything you said in terms of a lot of the schools are just kind of set up like prisons when it comes to, like negative reinforcement, loss of individual autonomy and just certain things like that. But when we speak about the zip codes, I mean, think about like to some of the things he said and something that Raquel mentioned earlier when it comes to the issue of public health, right? And we have our kids in environments that are in high crime, right? And the resource inequity, right? Like, how do you really expect a kid to be able to thrive in an environment like that and then have to go to school? And so, yeah, I think our kids are affected all around when we refuse to invest in the health of the environments that they are in and that they're coming from. So those are my thoughts.
I don't know if Jean Pierre said it, but I believe 74% of the incarcerated youth are black and brown kids. Somebody Google it and check me if I'm wrong. I think 74%. All right. Black kids are 18 to 29% more times, or 29 times more likely to be incarcerated than white youth. So ask me again the question. What's the
How zip codes impact.
All right. So there's a direct correlation between geography and the likelihood of a child ending up in the criminal legal system, right? Not because black kids in predominantly black neighborhoods are inherently predisposed to criminality, right? It's because they are, like you outlined, they are constantly being bombarded with over surveillance, targeting, every offense that a black child assumes is going to be over exaggerated. The response to it is over exaggerated as compared to a white child. The evidence shows that black children don't violate laws at a higher frequency than white children. They're just more heavily penalized. In addition to that, there's the adultification of our black children, right? We heard about it with Mike Brown, where the police was kind of describing him as like having super Negro strength. It was bizarre, right? And we see that when they talk about our children as compared to white children, when it's white boys boys will be boys, right? When it's a young black male, then he's a man, right? So our kids are dealing with that. There's a greater likelihood of school exclusion. They're dealing with, again, fewer health and housing and economic supports, our young people. And then again, you mentioned the higher police presence. So if you're talking about kind of trying to curtail some of that involvement, then really what we're going to have to talk about are those, again, community investments. You're going to hear a lot. This is going to be a reoccurring theme. Community investments, right? How are we supporting our kids beyond the schools, right? What does youth employment opportunities look like, right? There was a hearing, I think it was like last legislative session or the session before that, when our other brother, Tone Henshaw, he was testifying around the carjacking bills, right? And he said, like, when I was a kid and I was getting, involved in all of this, it was because I was hungry. I was trying to eat. And it was the guys who were doing the bad things in the community who was trying to feed me. So we need to be creating alternatives for our young people so they don't have to do these sort of things. We need to be making sure that when they falter, we're not meeting them at the prison gates. We're creating restorative practices and opportunities for them to correct and repair the harm that they've done in the communities, right? And not just throwing them away. We have a youth waiver system in the state that is incredibly problematic. If you have a chance, check out Human Rights Watch. They did a report called, I think, Throwing Our Kids Away. Yes. And it outlines all of the problems with the youth waiver system in the state. And just last legislative session, we were trying to beat back like 3 or 4 terrible bills where they're trying to, incarcerate our young people. And many of you in this community, thank you in advance, thank you. Many of you called your lawmakers and you told them that you didn't want to see these bills move, and thankfully they didn't move forward. But, so much of this fight is not just advancing good policy, but it's stopping the bad policy. So we got to watch out again this session, because I'm sure they're going to be trying to reintroduce some of those things. So we need to be having those conversations about making sure we're investing in the community beyond. And then also, too, did y'all run the numbers in the report about how much it costs to incarcerate a young person in the state?
I believe it's 74,000.
Say it again.
I I believe it's $74,000 per year.
Per year.
Yes.
Okay. So we need to be having those conversations, what are we spending on incarcerating our young people when we could be investing in educating our young people and creating real opportunities? Freedom schools, right? How are we investing in freedom schools to give our young people not just better access to academics, but culturally congruent supports, right? When you walk into the classroom, I don't see you as just, a problem in the community. I see you as my child, right? How are we supporting them through STEM so that they can actually compete with what's going on in society? How are we supporting them with the arts, right? Trenton, right here in Trenton, we launched our first Freedom School. This is my last comment, then I'll move on. We launched our Freedom School last summer, 7-week session. I was with a colleague today. Actually, we had a bill that passed in the assembly today to appropriate $3 million to establishing freedom schools in the state to supporting them. There's currently about 17 freedom schools. And in Trenton, we launched our freedom school, and my colleague, Diana Rogers, who heads up the CDC here, she told the story of a young lady who started the program. She was, I think, in 9th grade, but she was reading at like an elementary school level. And by the end of the 7-week program, her reading had jumped up to two grades. That's the power of investments in our young people in literacy, in showing them cultural congruent care and supports. So yeah, those are some of the ways that we support our young people and really try to, put a stop to this school to prison pipeline.
Thank you. Yeah, we can clap for them. So each one of you has brought up the struggles that our communities face with substance use, substance abuse, and sort of the drugs that have impacted our community. And specifically, what do you see as the most enduring legacy of the war on drugs in New Jersey communities? And where have reforms been successful or insufficient?
As the executive director of the Returning Citizen Support Group, I work with men and women coming home from prison, and having been incarcerated myself, I seen, brothers incarcerated. My brother was incarcerated with me, but I seen, in the prison yard, there were uncles, grandfathers, brothers, cousins, nephews, and I'm like, damn, your whole family locked up, right? So that's, and refresh me, what was the question again? I want to.
The enduring legacy of the war on drugs here in New Jersey.
Yeah, thank you. And so, I see the remnants of the war on drugs in our community, right? We see it every day. If you live in Newark, you live in Jersey City, you live in Passaic, you see it every day. Our children, right? How it has affected, how it decimated families, how it decimated communities. And so reparations is very important because we have to repair, or the government has to repair the harm that they cause our community with these policies, with these laws, right? An example is the drug laws, right? Of course, in Newark, you got a school in every other block, right? You go to suburbia, you got to go 15, 20, 30 miles, where to have a school. So, the disparities in the policies and the law. But the war on drugs really decimated our families, our communities. And so these are things that we work on as an organization, is helping create family reunification, but it's difficult when you don't have the resources.
Well, I will add, and I will say, when the official declaration of the war on drugs happened, it was before my time. But I can speak a little bit, just, from learning and talking to my elders and other individuals. Yes, broken families and mass incarceration is one of the largest enduring legacies when it comes to the war on drugs. And then we have to think about the crack versus cocaine, right? Those different things carry two different prison sentences, right? I have family members who struggle with drug addiction, and regardless of whatever remedies we try to use to help them, still to this day are impacted because there was never effective rehabilitation put in place for these individuals who are who struggle with drugs and addictions, and there's still a lack of resources even today in dealing with those. So yeah.
Yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about the numbers because I'm a numbers person. I just want to talk a little about numbers.
Go ahead, numbers.
From 2010 to 2019, right? New Jersey Policy Perspective, one of our partners, they did an excellent report some years back, and they talked about what New Jersey invested in the drug war. From 2010 to 2019, they invested 11.6 billion with a B to enforce the drug war. 5 billion for arrests, 2.2 billion to prosecute, 4.3 billion to incarcerate. So it's often said, and I understand the spirit of it, but it's often said it's impossible to quantify the damage that's been done to our communities. But you can. There's numbers. You can try. If you really, really put your head to it, you could try. Because here it is, right? Now you compare that again to what was invested in schools, what was invested in healthcare, what was invested in housing. These very communities that have been targeted, over-surveyed, and arrested, and ultimately divested from. So if you're talking about the enduring legacy, we're not just talking about the individuals who were arrested. We're not just talking about generations of earning potential that's been stripped from them. You're talking about families where grandma has to go broke putting money on the books. We're talking about the phones. Like it reverberates in every area. It would be easier to tell you how the war on drugs has not impacted our communities than to tell you all the ways that it has. Okay, so I'm thinking when we're talking about how are we gonna, what does reparations look like? What does repair looks like? Well, it looks like clean slate expungement and real clean slate expungement. Like not that play stuff we had, like the real implementation.
I just
of clean slate
would like
expungement.
to remind you this is being recorded.
Let the
Go
record
off.
reflect. And where do I look? Right over there? Am I looking at camera? Where's the camera? Right. Real clean slate expungement. We're talking expansion of the eligibility, so that you were alluding to the rule that proximity to the schools, right? So we're talking about expanding eligibility so that everyone can really get a chance at a second chance, and some could argue that they didn't even have a first chance. So we're talking about clean slate expungement. We're talking about direct and indirect reparative investments in housing and healthcare and education, right? So in Trenton, what does that look like? That looks like we have a crisis response team. Trenton, y'all know our brothers and sisters who work in the Trenton restorative violence interruption team. So we're talking about investing in those programs. Now we're hearing a lot of talk about, compassionate care around substance use. But back in the 80s, we was locking them up, right? Back in the 80s, it was just say no, right? So we're talking about making sure that we're taking those opioid settlement funds. Y'all heard about those? New Jersey is slated to get, I think up to $1 billion between now and 2038. Y'all know how that's split up? It's 50-50. Okay, between now and 2038, 50% of that money goes to the state. The other 50% is split up between the 21 counties, then it trickles down to municipalities. So what does that mean? That means you need to be contacting your county electeds and making sure that money is going towards community investments, right? Making sure that money is going towards supporting community-led violence interruption teams as an alternative to policing in your community. Making sure that money's going to community-led crisis response teams. so that when we see a brother or sister who's struggling with substance abuse, the only call you can make is not to 911. There's someone in the community who understands the struggle. There's somebody in the community who's uniquely invested in the struggle. There's someone in the community who's been through the struggle and can show up with love and compassion and treat that person with dignity and humanity, right? Make sure those monies are being invested in that. Our brothers and sisters who are coming home, the number one thing that they said they're struggling with, Chino, is what? Housing. Making sure those opioid funds are going towards housing to support our brothers and sisters coming home. Okay, so there's many different ways. Cannabis. Right now you got a bunch of white boys getting rich off of cannabis legal decriminalization. We need to make sure that those cannabis funds are being reinvested back into our communities. The money's there. There's a report that says in 2024, I think New Jersey cashed out over $1 billion in revenue for cannabis funds. Look outside your windows, y'all. What could Trenton do with some of that money? I'm just going to leave it there since you said it was recorded. I don't want to go too far, but we could talk about community land trusts. We could talk about stabilization grants. We could talk about some down payment assistance for housing. I know a few brothers and sisters who could use that. We could talk about some real entrepreneurship opportunities, capital grants. We could talk about that. But, I'm just going to leave it there. Just going to leave it there. Don't want to go too far.
So we have touched upon incarceration and reentry, and I do want to talk about the families and the folks who are directly impacted by the over-policing and by the criminal legal system, and specifically what role should impacted persons and families have in designing reforms versus just experiencing them? And I'm going to start at the ends.
Well, we run a Thursday support group in Newark, and is open to everyone. It's especially the family. The families don't have nowhere to go. They are impacted by mass incarceration. They don't have no one to talk to, no one that understands them. And a lot of times they don't realize there's other people that can relate to them. But on Thursdays, we have a safe space for not just men and women who are just as impacted, but their families as well. I think that the family should play a pivotal role in how resources are spent, what incarceration looks like, right? For me, reentry starts the second someone comes in contact with authority. But, prisons, as my sister alluded, is a profitable business, multi-billion-dollar business, right? Example, while the prison population in New Jersey has been reduced, the budget has not, right? So we're quick to invest in incarcerating and criminalizing mental health, drug addiction, and problems in our community, but we're not quick to invest in helping repair our communities.
So let me tell you the truth about the incarceration and reentry point, right? And I struggle with just the idea of reform because I don't think reform is appropriate. Abolition, I think, would be best when we're talking about the whole system of incarceration because the system was already built broken. It was never built on an equal, with a just in mind. So when we think about the role that that impacted families should play, right? I think I had to really think about the idea of reform. So, but to try to yield into your question, I think that families should actually receive some kind of funding to help their families who are coming from incarceration because they've been impacted in some way, shape, or form by their family being incarcerated and just the whole entire idea of the system. I have so much I can say on that, but there's other questions that you're going to ask, so I'm going to wait until you go into there.
I'll just say really quickly, central to how it is that Salvation and Social Justice operates as an organization is that we are not, we don't, we don't advocate for policies in a vacuum, right? We're not a think tank necessarily. We don't, sit around and pontificate on what policies we want to advance today. Everything that we do, we take our charge from the people. And I think similarly, when we're talking about how we're going to reform systems, if it's not informed by the people, by directly impacted people, then we've missed the plot, right? So we want to make sure that as we're talking about repair and reform, that we have directly impacted people at the table and not in a performative way, right? We don't want to bring them in 48 hours before the bill is about to be heard and say, we want you to enter a slip of support for this. No. That's not partnership. That's not collaborative spirits, right? We're talking about making sure they have a seat at the table, that they've got their hands in the preparation of the meal, and they get to dine with you properly, right? So we're talking about making sure that communities are kept in the loop and not just, a transactional sort of engagement where we only see you at election time, right? There needs to be a continuum of conversations and engagement to make sure that those things are, that our needs and our concerns are being reflected in the policies that are being advanced. I want to also just, offer this in, 2020 at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic. New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, SNSJ, our partners at the ACLU, we helped to lead a campaign around emergency credits bill that ultimately reduced the prison population in the state by more than 40%. It's the highest in the nation. Over 9,000 people released based on our advocacy. And to your point, the budget's not going down. When you start talking to people about bringing people home, about closing prisons, what do you hear? Well, what about the jobs? What are we going to do about the jobs? And if your only stream of income, if your only way of putting bread on the table is by incarcerating folks, then we need to rethink our values. And then those of us in a position of power structures, we need to rethink the opportunities that we're making available to people in our community, because that should not be the only lifeline for people in our community. So making sure that communities are involved in those conversations so that we can bring our incarcerated elders home. We know it costs sometimes over $600,000 a year to incarcerate a senior citizen inside our prisons. Right now, even though the prison population is going down, the seniors are growing. The population of seniors are growing. Well, it's not because old folks are knocking over liquor stores. It's because they can't get out. And it's costing taxpayers through the nose. And you know who's making the calls to have them come home? It's their loved ones. It's the community that's ready to welcome them back. And there's the community that's facing resistance. So we need to put legislators, we need to put electeds in place that are actually listening to community members, to directly impacted communities, who are saying what the needs are of those who are directly impacted. And if you're not doing that, then unfortunately we're going to be in a cycle that just continues to repeat itself.
Just being mindful of time so we can open the floor to questioning. I have one last question for our panelists, which is, what does public safety look like beyond policing? And what investments do you believe are required to make it a reality? You all have alluded to it, but I would just like you to articulate before we open the floor.
To me, public safety looks like community, helping community. For example, our organization, the Returning Citizen Support Group, we going a little bit back to the question you asked as far as, the family, right? So when we design this organization, we understand that we're not just helping the individuals that's coming out the prison system, but the family as well, right? Whether that's paying their light bill, helping them with food, something so that the person coming home is not a burden to their family. Now, for the next time, I'm going to just pass it over.
What does public safety look like beyond policing, and what investments are required to make it a reality? I think that we should start looking at things from a public health model rather than a public safety model. I wanted to speak more on points when it comes to individuals coming home and investing in the public health of the individual. In the words of a friend of mine, these systems that are being built under the guise of reentry, right? People were never meant to come home, right? There was not investment put into people coming home. They were only meant to either stay or go back. And we're approaching things consistently from a public safety lenses rather than a public health lens, where it requires investment of a holistic structure when it comes to the individuals and the families and the community. And so that's what investment looks like, right? We're changing the lenses and how we approach the whole idea and guise of public safety.
We can clap.
Talk that talk. Yeah, I think, I'll just, piggyback off of what my sister said. It's about investing in the social determinants of health, right? The safest communities are healthy communities, right? They're housed communities. They're communities that are fed. They're communities that have educational and economic opportunities. So when you start investing in that, then you'll see safer communities. By the time someone has contact with the criminal legal system, in particular young people, so there's so many checkpoints where they were failed, right? So we need to be investing in preventative supports, right? We need to be investing in young people well before they're interfacing with the criminal legal system. So it's about really investing in those social determinants of health.
Thank you.
Sorry, real quick, before we end the panel, right? I don't want to end the panel without saying something, because we're talking about reparations. We're talking about justice beyond punishment, right? I want to just highlight that slavery is still legal, right? I don't want us. I would be remiss to not mention that, right? It's still legal in the state of New Jersey. Right? When we look at the 13th Amendment and that Constitution, the exception clause allowed for our state to continue to enslave people through the carceral system. And so with that being said, we also have to do the work of acknowledging that still exists. And that still needs to be addressed. And so, yes, I just wanted to make that point. That's important. Thank you.
Can we give it up for our panelists, please? Thank you all so much. And so I'm going to open the floor to anyone who has some questions for our panelists. I see a hand. Yes, we'll pass the mic around. And then I saw a hand over here as well. And back here I have you as well.
Thank you. Okay. Good evening, and thank you so much for showing up and being real, even though you're being recorded. So with respect to the comment about releasing some people during COVID, but not reducing the funding for those institutions, to me, I don't care how anybody else wants to read that. We're going to keep the funding because they're probably coming back, because we're not investing in them being out, right? So I don't see that as just, oh, we're worried about jobs. I see that also as an investment in the system, that the system is going to keep thriving. I think your name is Raquel. Raquel, so you brought up the Tyree Nichols incident. I just want to, I'm not pushing back, but I want to expand on it a little bit. And you said you wanted to get away from the color thing when we talk about policing. But we can never get away from the color thing. this country was built on anti-blackness. Yes, those cops were black, but Tyree that is where we measure. Those cops would have never done that to a white child. Black cops treat black people like white cops treat black people. So that's the issue. It's not the issue of the perpetrator. It's not the race of the perpetrator. It's the race of the victim. Because even when we look at death penalty cases, it's the race of the person who was killed that determines if you get the death penalty or not, right? So we can, even though black cops mimic white cops, the bottom line is they know they'll get away with it because it's a black victim. I also want to say that I worked in Philadelphia with the Civilian Review Board, and I've spoken to cops about why is it that you black cops allow this to happen in your communities and to, other black people. And one cop said to me, because I don't want to die by friendly fire. Okay? So in other words, power protects power, corruption protects corruption. And if you try to operate outside of the corruption and the power, you're going to go down. In the workplace, if you are a black manager and you try to treat the black people in the workplace just like you treat the white people, that is not encouraged. In fact, they will only hire you if somewhere in there they get a signal from you that you are willing to maintain the status quo, which is to treat the black and brown people less than the white people. If you're not going to speak out about the oppression of the black and brown people in the workplace. And in all the systems, that's how it works. You must be anti-black to succeed in this country when you are of color, and when you're white too, because white allies feel it too. So, thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to pass my mic over here.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Atalia Armstrong. I am a civic and public policy advocate. I am also a direct descendant of United States slavery, and I am a proponent for lineage-based reparations. So with that, I have two questions. The first one is, given that this report's recommendations intersect with executive authority, does its framing place an implicit expectation on the newly elected governor, who received more than 90% of the black vote, to publicly address or advance its findings, particularly when her office holds the capacity to establish a reparations task force through executive prerogative or in partnership with lawmakers? You want to answer, and then I'll do the second? So do question two? Well, I mean, I think we should leverage the report because she hasn't spoken publicly about reparations at all, yet she received 92, 94% of the vote. So how is this report going to leverage that on our behalf?
I think it comes down to accountability, and that's black and brown community holding her accountable, right, to make sure that that report is not swept under the rug.
I just want to point out one key difference with all respect. She's gone to the mic several times already, and she spoke out about ICE directly, what needs to happen, legislation that needs to move, and she has not opened her mouth on reparations. So it is about accountability, but it's about everybody in this room holding her accountable, the lawmakers and everybody else. They cannot keep receiving our vote, and this is reactive work here. She should have come to the table. I know you guys can't answer for her, but that's why I was asking about the report being leveraged on our behalf in that regard.
I will, yes, definitely clap on that. I will offer this though. You're exactly correct, right? In terms of the black vote being instrumental in securing this win, right? You're aware of the statewide black agenda events that the town halls we've been having. That's essentially what the body of that's the function of those events, is to have everyone in throughout the state come to those events, outline the issues that are of concern, so that we can then strategize, right, around making sure that we're holding this administration accountable around those issues. Several of those issues have been put on the table. We've gotten black clergy in the room to lift up many of these issues. The conversations are happening, but to your point, it's going to require everyone in this room and then some to be applying the necessary pressure to make sure these things are happening. If you go to the SNSJ website, we have the statewide black agenda listed, where many of the items that are also reflected in the report are on that agenda. It's up to all of us to be making the calls, to be mobilizing our local, our county officials to make sure these things are being discussed in the rooms where this administration is. So I guess I'm agreeing with you in a very long-winded way, but also putting it back on the community that we all need to be having the conversation to hold her agenda, hold her accountable. Absolutely. Yes is the short answer. How is the longer one.
Yeah, and just to add, we need to mobilize in the masses, right? We need to make sure that we are collective in our mobilizing. Just wanted to add that. So yes, I agree.
Okay, question number 2. Why does the report frame reparations so broadly across racial identity when the claim itself is historically specific, rooted in the lineage of those who experienced United States chattel slavery and its legal aftermath? If the structural conditions outlined were originally engineered to restrict descendants of enslaved people, how does expanding the framework beyond that lineage uphold the clear historical and legal basis of the claim? Moreover, given that other reparations models, both domestically and internationally, have been awarded based on who directly experienced the harm or their identifiable descendants, rather than all who were later impacted, what was the council's rationale for adopting a broader race-based framing in this case, especially when race-based frameworks are more likely to face rejection by both?
Sure, I'll answer that question. Since I'm the convener of the council and I was deeply involved in the thinking and the rationale and the logics and the conversation. So first, what I want to let you all know is that the approach that we've taken in the report and as part of the New Jersey Reparations Council is what we called a harms-based approach. So we look at who was affected by the harms, and thinking about the harms in kind of 3 different kinds of periods. First, there's a period of slavery in New Jersey. Second, there's a period of Jim Crow and segregation, and then there are contemporary harms. And in each of those periods, there are different populations of black people who experience those harms, because those harms are racial, right? And they're racial in the sense that black people were condemned regardless of their status of being free or enslaved under slavery. As I said before, right at the beginning, free and enslaved black people were assumed to be enslaved. Free black people were assumed to be part of slavery. They were kidnapped, regulated, prevented from voting, prevented from engaging. That's racial. That's not a status of being enslaved. That's a status of being a racialized person, as being seen as black. Under Jim Crow and segregation, you had populations coming from the South to New Jersey, right, who had not been enslaved in New Jersey and were subject to Jim Crow and segregation in New Jersey as part of the Great Migrations. But you also had migration from outside of the U.S. to here in New Jersey, yes, prior to 1965, and those black people were subject to racial restrictive covenants, Jim Crow segregation. They were subject to those harms, and so therefore they should be eligible for reparations, for repair. And then lastly, the populations that came after 1965 were also subject to mass incarceration, the racial wealth gap, the racial homeownership gap, over-policing, maternal mortality, right? And so you see black people being killed and over-policed. No one's asking them what part of the world they came in or where their parents came from when police shoot them, right? So, also, there is no actual legal case that has gone before the Supreme Court saying that a lineage-based approach would be, quote unquote, more legal than a harms-based approach. Places like Evanston in Illinois have taken a harms-based approach. Also, I just want to go back, this is important. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution was designed to address racial harms, okay? When the legislature and the called the Radical Republicans, the Reconstruction Republicans, created the 14th Amendment, it empowered the U.S. legislature to address racial harms so that free black people and black people who were previously enslaved, who were subject to, quote unquote, the black codes that existed after slavery, it was meant to address racism, okay? And so, not just a lineage-based approach in which one's status as descendants of enslaved people in the United States, but racial, white supremacy, that was the goal, right? And I'll get into this a little bit in our closing remarks, but this is a conversation that people are having broader. Evanston, Illinois is taking a harms-based approach. This is an approach that international standards take also. This is what the approach that we've taken. It's an international standard around comprehensive reparations, because we're not thinking about reparations just in terms of payments. And we have policy recommendations that are payments just for the descendants of enslaved people in New Jersey. I just want to make that clear. And also for folks who were subject to the harms after slavery and for closing the racial wealth gap. We got to think about slavery as being a function of white supremacy and its afterlives, not just as a specific act in one place, but as a set of policy to create white supremacy. And that's part of what reparations is meant to repair. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. I'm getting a flag from our organizers that we have time for just one more question. So this young gentleman in the middle. Two? She said two. No, we have a hand in the back, and then I'll get to some of the folks in the front.
First, I just wanted to say thank you all so much for the information. My name is Carl White. I'm a student over at the College of New Jersey. I'm really like new to this, so I seen the flyer for this one because I live in Jersey City up closer to Newark. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna come to this one with my friend, me and Francis, we showed up, and now I'm gonna go to the next one in Newark to get more information and do what I have to do. But I just wanted to ask, what can we do on the student side as a youth? What can we do on our college campus, off college campus, to help other people, like educate them or encourage them to go to settings like this, or to be in a space where we can get educated as well, but also advocate for, again, us on our side of things?
First thing you can do is connect with me after this event, because we are always looking for young people who are energized to lead this work. It's worth remembering that all social justice movements have really been led by the youth, right? So if you're hungry, if you've got the passion and the energy to lead this work, then please connect with me, and then certainly we can get into the nuts and bolts of how we do that. But I think also from where you are, civics, right? Really working with young people, both at the university level, but also at the high schools, to really start to build their civic chops, right? There's the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice is leading a campaign around Vote 16, right? To really get our young people, well, I'll let them talk about it more explicitly, but making sure that we are building up civic engagement in young people very early, and basically, and working with them around mobilizing and advocacy training, right? How are they having conversations around these legislative issues? How are they extracting the needs and the concerns from the community so they can then communicate that to those in the positions of power? How are we building narratives around the issues that are most important to young people? So really working around like advocacy 101, really mobilizing young people so they feel comfortable, so that they feel prepared to have those very difficult conversations, and doing it everywhere you are, in the churches, on the pavement, at the schoolyard. So.
Yeah, you're right. Next to we're in Newark, right? Again, on Thursdays, 32 Prince Street from 6 to 8 p.m. You're welcome to come, and we can connect before we leave. But we're always looking for volunteers as well, right? So really quick, one of the things that we do when men come home from prison and women, we ask them, are you registered to vote? Alarmingly, 8 6 out of 8 are not registered to vote. And these are men that are 38, 40 years old, and I look at them, I'm like, you serious? Yeah. So, and I was having a discussion with a young black man that came into my office who just came from prison, and it lasted 2 hours, and it became heated, right? But, you know, we came to a mutual ground, right? I said, I respect your position, and he respected my position, but definitely we need more civic engagement. Like Raquel said, you know, the youth is our future. You guys, you know, come through and learn the movement. We're not just an organization, we're a movement. So we definitely, let's connect.
And I know I'm not a panelist, but I will plug our Vote 16 campaign, which was successful in Newark, where we registered 16 and 17-year-olds to vote in school board elections. You can get involved in Jersey City and bring that program to Jersey City and into Hudson County, where you can get 16 and 17-year-olds because you are just past where they were, getting them involved in voting in not just school board elections, but also municipal elections. Also, I will encourage you to see Asada Man and Nason Carr, who are sitting in the back, who are instrumental in leading our youth summit as well, which is in Newark, and our community engagement. I think we have time for one more question. I'm getting,
Hello.
yes, one more question, so I'm gonna go here.
Hi, my name is Natalie Edwards, and my question is actually for the lovely gentleman in the back, the one that spoke earlier. It's more of a comment / question, but as someone sitting here and who is not new to the conversation about reparations, and I don't know this lovely lady who's sitting behind me who asked the question before, but a few things. Can you clarify for me again the point of view of your paper and its definition of who should qualify for reparations, number one? Number two, I suspect, based on your answer, and this is not something we're going to solve tonight, but it's been said that one of the reasons, not the reason, but one reason that the fight for reparations has not gotten as far as it could have is because we as a people haven't even agreed to a definition of who should qualify. And in order to make a demand, we have to be clear on what the demand is. And thirdly, well, I'll wait for you to answer the first one, which is, can you just repeat who you think qualifies? Because if I heard you correctly, I believe I understood that you said not only people that were enslaved, but anyone in New Jersey who encountered the Jim Crow or the negative racism. So I'm confused because to my understanding, how do you define when that stopped? Because if somebody came to America today and got off the plane at Newark Airport and encountered racism, are they too entitled to the reparations equal to someone who is in the direct line of slavery? And I say that as someone whose parents immigrated to this country. So I am not a direct descendant of American slavery. Have I encountered racism? Absolutely, as a black woman. I feel I'm just as black of a woman as anybody else. But I'm not gonna stand up here and say that I have encountered in my blood the direct impact of chattel slavery in America. So to me, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, your answer to this lady's question angered me. So I don't know if I'm the only one, but please clarify.
And so I too am a direct descendant, and I trace my great-great-grandfather enlisted in the Union Army at the signing of the Civil War. And so, you know, we trace that direct lineage. So yeah, and I know, and from what I understood, there were 3 levels and there were 3 tiers and all of that kind of thing, so, but yeah.
Can you hear me now? Yeah, I appreciate that question. So just to clarify, yes, in the report, it's not me, the report, all black people in New Jersey are eligible for reparations. So I'll just make that clear again. I'm going to say that again. All black people in New Jersey are eligible for reparations. I'll say that a third time. All black people in New Jersey are eligible for reparations. And the reason why we say that is I think one of the assumptions about this idea of eligibility is not, that's the first question. The first question is, what is the vision for reparations? That is the first question. That is the foundational question, right? We talk about foundational Black Americans, but we don't talk about what is the foundational vision for reparations. And that's where we get the question of eligibility flows from. So what is the vision of repair in the report? It's a New Jersey where black people can thrive, where black people can flourish, black people can win, right? And slavery and its harms, right, fundamentally shape New Jersey. And I brought up, I'll bring it up again to clarify, there are 3 racial regimes, right? Not just in New Jersey, but in the United States. There's slavery, there's Jim Crow and segregation, and then there's after that, which is happening now at this very moment and hasn't stopped. It's the accumulation of history, sedimentation, like rocks, right? Like layered on the top of each other, layered. Now, New Jersey has jurisdiction or power only over New Jersey, right? And that means that the descendants of enslaved people in New Jersey, right, if we were to restrict it, would only be for New Jersey. Most of the folks, black people in New Jersey, aren't descendants of enslaved people in New Jersey. They're descendants of enslaved people from around the United States as part of the Great Migrations. Let me finish, right? Most black people in New Jersey come from other parts of the United States as part of the Great Migrations. This is why in the 1930s, the state of New Jersey started to publish papers trying to account for what all these this increased black population was happening. Why were they here? What was happening? How do we account for this, right? Also, I just want to point out, when New Jersey was established as a colony, where did those first black people come from? They came from Barbados. The white settlers took enslaved people from Barbados. This is in the report itself. This is historic. The lines that are drawn, that we are drawing now, are colonial lines, right? And we cannot take colonial lines as the basis for why we're making determinations. This is in the history, right? I'm not making this up. You can go to any text. You can read this. This is in the report. Also, we take a harms-based approach. And we understand reparations as not just cash payments. I want to make this clear. Reparations is more than cash payments, it always has been. Historians, black people have always been organizing for reparations way beyond cash payments. Right? Cash payments is only one form of reparations, and we call for cash payments to descendants of enslaved people in New Jersey, descendants of those who faced the harms after slavery, and for closing the racial wealth gap. But to address reparations and address slavery, you need structural change, I'm going to say this again, structural. You need comprehensive change. And that cannot be done through the eligibility, a narrow eligibility requirement. That's a fundamental change. It's in the report, right? And this is the approach of many reparationists across the country and across the world, right? And so, this is an ongoing conversation. I'm happy to have it. Folks are having this across the country. You may not like the answers, but when you think about it and do this study and read the history, engage in the conversations with the folks, you develop this idea of this harms-based approach. Look at the harms themselves, right? And you begin from that as the basis as opposed to thinking about eligibility as the basis, right? And you begin to look at the history in which slavery crosses all kinds of lines, right? Even the lines of where we are in New Jersey, right, shifted back and forth. I just want to take that into account. So we have to think about that when we're thinking about what does repair look like. We need a big vision. Think about after World War II when the Allies invested in Europe, particularly the United States, something called the Marshall Plan. Think about reparations as that kind of level of investment in black communities. All right, don't think of it just narrowly as a direct cash payment. That's a very kind of, in some ways, just one vision, this one form, one way of doing it. We need to think of it comprehensively, big. So I just want to keep that in mind. Think about the future in a big kind of scale and big kind of vision.
We have a question in the back.
Peace, family. Could we all agree that something that has an exception isn't abolished? Can we agree that something that has an exception has not been abolished? So for us to say that slavery was abolished in the United States is to ignore that in the Constitution it says except as punishment for crime. Right? Now, since 2018, 8 states have removed that exception. As a movement, we understand that slavery remains legal, right? And up until 5 days ago, that was theoretical until the Colorado courts just ruled in our favor, meaning that forced labor is no longer allowed in the state of Colorado upon a conviction. The cascade of effects that we would talk would happen in the criminal justice system happen by solely removing those 14 words. And I've been doing this fight for 9 years, family. I'm in the clouds because we won, right? So here to say the entire conversation on reparations needs to begin with the acknowledgement that it remains legal and we must do something to get rid of it before we can repair it. Because if we try to repair and get reparations while slavery remains legal, that sounds crazy to me. When all we have to do to organize as a people is have a constitutional referendum. We've been doing that in New Jersey for the past 3 legislative sessions, and the people haven't stood up because we have mass miseducation teaching the people that slavery ended in 1865, when all that happened that year was that propertization was removed from an individual and given to the state. The state of New Jersey practices legalized slavery. And the only way to repair slavery is to permanently abolish it. Thank you, family.
And on that note, thank you so much to you as the audience. Thank you so much to our panelists. And I'm going to turn this over to Jean-Pierre for closing remarks.
Thanks so much, Saraya, and thanks to our panelists. Can we clap again for them, please? Please, the wonderful panelists. Thank you so much, and I just want to thank all of you for being here and for your energy, for your passion, for your interest, for the questions. I really appreciate it. I'm just going to give some brief closing remarks, and then we'll have a closing prayer. I'm sure many of you are in this room. You believe and support reparations, but maybe some of you don't think it's actually possible. Particularly given this debate around eligibility, debate around what the scale and the size and the scope is. My colleagues over at the Bliss Collective call this gap between support for reparations and the belief that can actually happen the hope gap. I want to point something out. Here in the state of New Jersey, reparations were paid. They weren't paid to enslave people. They were paid to enslavers. From 1806 to 1811, the state of New Jersey paid cash payments to enslavers for quote-unquote freeing enslaved people. In actuality, those people were never freed, only in name only. They were quote-unquote apprentices for life. It cost the state in 1 year 1/3 of its budget. It was so costly the state had to end the program. Many of you are well aware that we are on our 250th anniversary of the United States. There are going to be many events celebrating this, including, I think, a UFC MMA fight on the White House lawn. But also, it's another anniversary. It's the 400th anniversary of the colonization of New Jersey, in which Native peoples were displaced and colonized, in which you begin to see white settlers begin to take people from Barbados and from Africa to here in New Jersey enslaved. What is called New Amsterdam, or New Holland. And it is that history, that truth, right, that we are taking out from being buried, unburying. So think about it this way. Think about the story of the 250 years as something that someone wrote down. But underlying that, underneath that, is a longer history, a history of violence, a history of colonization, a history of slavery. And what we're doing with this work is we're excavating that truth. We are going into the cemetery and finding where the bodies are buried. I told you yesterday was Toni Morrison's birthday. On Monday, February 23rd, is the birthday of W.B. Du Bois. Du Bois was the first black person to get a PhD from Harvard. He was one of the founders of the NAACP. Also, one of the founders of sociology and American Studies. And also, his father was born in Haiti. But I bring this up because in 1903, Du Bois publishes a book in what the historian Rayford Logan calls the nadir of race relations. And the nadir is the lowest point because at that point in 1903, you see the establishment of segregation in the United States, unfettered segregation. The Supreme Court doesn't have the back of black people. The federal government is nowhere to be found. Lynchings are everywhere. And in 1903, Du Bois publishes The Souls of Black Folk. And you know, Du Bois is a northern guy. He's born in Massachusetts, and he goes to Tennessee, to Fisk University, and he goes to Atlanta. And on his trips down south, white people would ask him in kind of oblique ways about race, and they would ask him, how does it feel to be a problem? How does it feel to be a problem? And his reply was he would answer seldom a word. In 1935, Du Bois publishes Black Reconstruction. Single-handedly, and this is in the middle of the Great Depression where people are beginning to face the crisis of capitalism. And Du Bois writes that book about Reconstruction because he single-handedly wants to resuscitate Reconstruction as a valuable moment in American history. Because people were telling lies about black people, what he called the propaganda of history. And he talked about how Reconstruction, black people took a step towards freedom, and afterwards, a step back towards slavery. And I bring that up because when we think about reparations, we got to think about it in this tradition of Reconstruction, as it's the second founding that expanded our democracy, and the second Reconstruction that established multi-racial democracies, the Civil Rights Movement. And just recently, we lost a bridge and connection between civil rights and black power in our current moment, Jesse Jackson. And when people would ask Du Bois, you know, how does it feel to be a problem, they would be undermining his somebody-ness, right? And what did Jesse Jackson say? I am somebody, right? Black people had a somebody-ness to them that he wanted to bring out. I am somebody, right? So much of the way this country is organized, the West is organized, is the devaluation of blackness. When you look at where black people are labeled in the racially restrictive covenants, it's next to the things that are devalue your property, that blackness is devalued. So next to things that are associated that will undermine the value of your property, right? Things that are putting the lot and the property near a toxic site. Blackness is toxic. And so it took a lot for Jesse Jackson to say to black people, you are somebody, I am somebody. For those of you who are thinking about the hope gap, right, and can't have that vision, don't have the hope for it to happen, I just go back to Jesse Jackson's point, right? Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive. Keep hope alive, right? The reason why we have Sankofa on the cover, right, that is a Ghanaian Akan cosmology. To go back and get it is to look at those who came before us, the ancestors, right? Many of the folks that came before us, the unnamed, those who are not recorded in history books, who did this work, who laid the groundwork for us to do this, and we want to be good ancestors. So I'll just say this, keep hope alive, keep hope alive, keep hope alive. Thanks.
Let us close out in a word of prayer. God of healing and God of wholeness, we have wrestled tonight. We have listened. We have felt the weight of very hard truths. Where there is frustration, Lord, steady us. Where there is discomfort, strengthen us. Where there is disagreement, empower us to stay seated at the tables. Give us the courage, when seated at these tables, to stay until decisions are finalized. Give us the discipline to remain in the rooms when the conversations are uncomfortable. Do not let us walk away from the very spaces where our voices carry power. Do not let discouragement cause us to surrender ground that we are able to transform. Teach us to move from a public safety model built on control to a public health model rooted in restoration. When someone comes home, let us invest boldly in preventative measures, in mental health care, housing, education, trauma recovery, youth opportunity, and reentry that restores dignity. Raise up leaders in this capital city and throughout the state who will fund what heals, protect what restores, and build systems worthy of humanness. Let New Jersey not follow the old patterns. Let us set a new standard. Send us out from here tonight, not just informed, but wholly commissioned, not just informed, but wholly mobilized. Let justice rise, Lord. Let restoration expand. Let courage outgrow fear. And let it begin with those of us in the room and those of us online. This we pray in the name of the God that restores, in the name of the God that heals, in the name of the God who saves. Amen.